Welcome back to the Pursuit of Progress, the show where real estate, strategy, and personal growth collide. I'm Adam, joined as always by my co host Ben. In today's bonus episode, we're actually giving you 5 tactical, real world negotiation tips inspired by a book, Never Split the Difference, written by former FBI negotiator Chris Voss. These are high level strategies, the kind of tools that can really help you close deals, influence decisions, and win without creating resistance. Whether you're in real estate, sales, or maybe you're just trying to negotiate better outcomes in life, this is for you. These aren't just ideas, they're executable moves. Each one of these tips can change how you show up in conversations starting today. Ben, what's going on, man? I'm excited for this one.
My brother, so am I. I have seen this book passed around online. I've seen it recommended. I've never read it, so today I'm going to be excited to see what's in plan and what you got, what you're going to share with us.
Yeah, man. I'm actually holding up the book for anybody that's watching this on our video version on YouTube. And for anybody that's listening on audio, if you guys don't know about that, we have every episode on video on our YouTube channel. So definitely check that out. But what I really love about this book is obviously it's a true, actual true story, actual person here, Chris Voss, that's an FBI, master negotiator. But he shares some actual, stories from some of his negotiations and kind of weaves those in along with some of these tips that he's sharing. So I just think it's cool to have some substance behind what he's teaching and actually have some stories that back up some of these tips that we're going to be sharing with you guys today. Ben, before we get started on that, I know there's some really good quotes in this book, and then we had one that we were prepared to share with the audience. You want to do that for them?
Yeah, yeah. That's what I was just going to mention. When you had shared with me that you were going to share this book, I looked up Chris and looked at some of his quotes, and this was one that jumped out at me. Just reading it here, so awesome. He who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation. Damn,
Say that
damn.
one more time.
He who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation.
Very true.
Yeah, we were talking about this off camera as far as just learning how to become an expert communicator. And to me, I think of that as just a very highly skilled communication tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's jump in, Adam, to the 5 advanced negotiation tactics that Voss teaches in his book, Never Split the Difference. Excited to hear what you got. Let's start off with tactic number 1.
All right. So tactic number 1, he calls this the late night FM DJ voice. So this is all about tonality. So speak slowly with a calm, downward inflection tone. I actually listened to this book also on audiobook, and I think that was really helpful because he, during this chapter, was sharing some examples of this. And, there really is a lot to be said about the voice and how it can trigger some psychological safety and authority, depending on what message you're trying to get across. An example of this in real estate would be, presenting a low offer. Maybe you're trying to, lowball the seller and at least, put an offer out there that maybe is a little bit less than what they're expecting. But you can do this through your tonality and present that low offer in a tone just to reduce some of that resistance. Tonality is really big, something that I've been trying to be more mindful on. And, at the end of the day, it's just practice. It's just something where the more you at least are intentional about this and aware of your tonality, I think the more you'll start to think about it and start to kind of mess around with it a little bit, test out different ways to present to people in different scenarios. And have you ever messed around at all with tonality or at least been aware of this as a negotiation tactic?
How do you like me? Ow.
Yeah, there we go. I like that.
I have always, with me being on the phone a lot more, I have always learned to kind of listen to myself from an audio perspective. So what I'll do is I'll practice in the mirror. I'll learn my cadence and kind of get my flow. And then there's been times where I've recorded my own calls and just listened to those. How you think you sound when you're on the phone is always different than how you actually sound when you listen to yourself. So I think it's a really important exercise. And there definitely is an art when it comes to this.
Mm-hmm.
When you listen to someone who is really, really polished, whether it's in person, online, giving a presentation, online, in person, or even over the phone, Yeah, it's the way that you choose your words, the cadence, the tone, everything, all of that comes together and it creates confidence and intrigue and like you really know what you're talking about.
One of my favorite speakers from back in the day was Zig Ziglar, and a couple, I think, actionable just tips that I'll share with you guys today on what Zig taught. Number one is he always had this phrase where you can the listener or the person on the other end of the phone call, they can really hear if you're smiling, and that sounds kind of goofy, but just being aware of when you are talking, even if you're in a room by yourself and you're just on the phone, not a video call, just a regular phone call, try and be mindful of that. Try and be smiling while you're talking, and just by doing so, you're automatically going to be affecting this tonality, and you're going to be coming off as a more
Good.
positive type tone. So that's
Yeah,
one thing. And another one is also just to even be standing up when you're making calls. By standing up while you're on the phone, while you're talking to somebody, you don't want to be out of breath, but just having that additional level of energy by standing up, that really also comes across kind of subliminally on a phone call. If somebody's sitting at their desk and they're just kind of tired, fatigued, that's going to come across as well. And that's going to be negative. That's going to sound like you're not engaged with the caller. Maybe you're tired, you're not very enthusiastic. All of this stuff is very, you can really mold this stuff if you change up your environment and just use some of these little tricks and tactics.
that's great. Yeah, so, sometimes I'll work from home and I feel like when I'm at home, there's so many more distractions, kids, dogs. The dogs could explode at any moment as far as their yapping and their barking. And when you have all of that other chaos around you, it's very difficult to have the same kind of delivery and dialect and cadence that you're talking about.
Hmm.
Tactic number 2, the rule of 3. So I thought this was interesting from what you shared. Give the same answer 3 different ways. First question, then mirror, then summarize. Why? Because it creates clarity and helps with buy-in. It also helps avoid future backtracking and keeps people committed. Kind of share some examples from what you read as far as why this is so important.
So Chris Voss has a different way of presenting this point than what I was taught way back in the day. I think this is actually something that I learned maybe back in college. It was probably at least 25 years ago. I don't know if it was from a sales training or it might have even been from my grandpa, but the version that I'm going to share with you guys is what I call feel, felt, found, or the 3 F's. So feel, felt, found, the way that works is you're going to be doing the same thing where you're getting them to answer in 3 different ways. That what Ben just shared: question, mirror, and summarize. So feel, felt, found, as an example, let's just say I'm talking to Ben on a sales call and I'm trying to sell him, a brand new pencil. Well, so feel, felt, found, the feel, Ben's maybe saying, I think it's, a little bit overpriced. I would say, you know what? I totally understand. And honestly, I feel the same way. You're relating to them. You're questioning them, but you're also kind of relating to them. Feel. Felt would then be that second part, or mirror, where you could say something like, well, I totally understand how you feel. In fact, I've actually felt the same way before. So that's that felt. And then the third F is found. And that's the same as what Ben's saying with summarize. So feel, felt, found. Yeah, Ben, I totally understand how you feel on this. In fact, I felt the same way. But what I found is by buying this little bit more expensive pencil, I didn't have to replace it as quickly. It lasted a lot longer, and it just gave a lot better final product when I wrote it on a piece of paper, whatever it may be. But just basically that feel, felt, found. Start thinking about that in your own conversations you're having with negotiating, and I think that's just a way to, again, question, mirror, and then summarize whatever it is you're talking about. It helps provide clarity, and it also helps them buy in because you're relating to them, but also to yourself, making them feel a little bit more heard.
That's great. Learning how to frame what they're looking for, and, I'm just thinking about phone calls that I've had recently and ways that I can improve with that exact strategy, so awesome.
So, talk now about tactic number 3, and this is in quotes. That's right is your goal. So, that's right is your goal. Aim for them to say that's right, not you're right. What this does is it really shows that they felt heard and understood. And it's just this little tiny psychological signal that you're aligned. And this is just another one of these things where you want to get them to agree with you. You want to get them to even engage with you. If you're in person negotiating with somebody, another easy way to do this is to just slowly start nodding your head in agreement. And I know if anybody that's listening on podcast and not on the video version, just imagine that I'm slowly just nodding my head up and down like I'm agreeing with somebody. When you're talking to somebody, just to be doing that while they're talking to you, just the slow nod, that's a subliminal way for them to kind of be like, you know what? Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's a way to get them to agree with you, maybe if they're not even really thinking through what it is that you're presenting to them. So just another little kind of a side note, but you just want to always focus on the positive, not the negative, and to get them to start agreeing and saying that's right, they're going to be more likely to agree with whatever it is you're pitching them.
Yeah, and that's where the tonality, the positive body language, smiling and dialing, all of that kind of comes together with with
Hmm.
with this example.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to jump right into our sponsored segment. We've had a really good sponsor for the last few episodes and excited to have them sharing, having them sponsor tonight's episode. So, this bonus episode is brought to you by two great companies, Adam Sells Denver and American Money 101. And they're promoting their free live real estate masterclass. And as I said, this is actually hosted by Ben and myself. If you guys want to level up your real estate game, make smarter moves in today's market, come hang out with us. Sign up at webinar.adamsellsdenver.com. Again, this is a live, free, online masterclass that we're hosting once a month. People are getting a ton of value, especially anybody that's a little bit on the fence or just feeling kind of beat down and frustrated with all that's going on in this very dynamic, challenging market here in Denver, Colorado. So we'd love to see you guys on the next one. It's free. We'll see you guys there.
Back at it. Tactic number 4, anchoring with ranges. Don't open with a hard number. Use a range that favors your side. A real estate example of this would be homes like this sell between 600 and 675,000, leaning toward the low end based on condition. The reason that this is important is because it anchors their expectations. I'll do the same thing with monthly payments, quoting a pre-approval. I'll give them a range of their monthly payment. You can, expect this range. Now, based off of where you're looking, property taxes look like they're a little bit higher. There's also an HOA, so I would, expect that to be a little bit on the higher side.
Kind of along the same lines, but just something else that's real estate related, I think is just worth sharing from a negotiation standpoint. If you guys are in an initial phase of buying a home and you're submitting an offer to a seller, you're the home buyer, and you're just in that very initial phase where you're writing up the offer. Maybe the offer does not get accepted, doesn't get declined, but what's pretty much most common these days is we have what's known as a counter offer, where they're pushing back and just maybe amending a few of the things in the initial offer to hopefully get to an agreement. And a lot of times this ends up being price. And it is just crazy how often people meet in the middle. So let's just say, as an example, we're putting an offer out on a home and we're offering 650,000, and then the sellers come back and they say, "No, we want 700,000." It's crazy how often we end up meeting in the middle. So I bring that up because it's important just to realize that that doesn't just apply to real estate. That can really apply to a lot of different forms of negotiation. And if you're aware of that going into it, you can really use that to your advantage and maybe put in a little bit lower of an offer initially or whatever it is that you're pitching or selling, just with the expectation that it's not going to be accepted, but you're going to end up kind of in the middle. And if you start off, at a different price point or a different range, hopefully if you're intentional about that, you'll end up at that amount that you're kind of shooting for.
Yeah, still being able to use some of your leverage, identifying if you're a buyer that you have the leverage, submitting an offer that's a little bit lower, but also with the expectation that that may be coming up. On the seller side, they're more than likely having conversations the same way. We're going to list it for this, but with their agent, based off of the market where we're at, inventory, buyers, interest rates, affordability, you need to be prepared to come down. What is that quote? A successful compromise is when both parties are slightly dissatisfied. That kind of reminds me of what you're describing here, where When both sides compromise, they're not getting the exact deal that they want, but what they want, number one, is the deal. And so if you keep that in mind, that has to be number one.
Whether you guys love him or hate him, Donald Trump is famous for one of the books that he wrote years and years ago called The Art of the Deal. And it makes me think about some of these pretty ridiculous things that he's done in the last, few months since being reelected. One of them being Greenland, and how we were trying to have Greenland become the 51st state, or at least be part of the United States. This is an example where a lot of times with Trump, he just says stuff or proposes things that are so outrageous, and there's some negotiation backstory to this where he's really doing this in certain cases, just because when he then pitches and tries to negotiate what he's kind of actually trying to get accepted, it doesn't all of a sudden seem as outlandish because he's created this, much more ridiculous kind of assumption up front where it kind of takes some of the steam off of the actual amount that he's offering or trying to get agreed to. So kind of along the same lines again about these ranges and just being very intentional about not using a hard number and kind of thinking through ahead of time on what the end goal is that you're trying to get to. All right. And then tactic number 5, I love this one. This one's called the go for no strategy. Instead of chasing a yes, really embrace the power of hearing no. This is something too, just in sales in general, that it's taken me a long time and I'm still not there, but really changing your mindset on what no means. No is not necessarily a complete negative, beat you down type response. In fact, a lot of times, if you can change your frame of how you look at this, it's just one step closer to a yes. You're just filtering out the people that you can't serve, and you're hopefully one step closer to finding that person that you can help and assist. So just kind of being aware that the go for no is a really, really important thing to have in your tool belt. And Chris Voss, he teaches that people feel safer and more in control and even just less pressured when they say no. Ask questions that encourage a no response to lower their defenses and reveal the real objection. So an example of this would be, would it be a bad idea to consider a cash offer with no contingencies? This kind of flips that pressure and keeps you in control without sounding pushy. Would it be a bad idea? Or another example would be just I don't I'm kind of off the cuff here, but just really understanding that no, it's not rejection. It's really just part and really the start of a real negotiation. The faster you get to the no, the faster you can start uncovering that real path forward. Ben, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think this is really, really powerful because when you change that, when you have that switch in your head, go for the no, there are so many people that are afraid to hear no. They're so afraid of the rejection. And so because they're so afraid of being told no, they won't even make the phone call. They won't even present the pitch. They won't approach the girl. But the only way to get the experience is by doing those exact things. And you have to embrace the no. There's so many kind of really, really successful people and that have this mindset where when someone tells you no, just assume they're saying yes. And I know I read that recently somewhere. I can't remember who said it, but that's what this guy's philosophy was. When someone tells me no, I just assume they're saying yes. He just like keeps like he does not stop. No does not mean no. And so I think it's a really, really I'm reflecting back to my earlier days in the mortgage business where I would go in on Saturday as an originator, and this is before I had my network built out. My manager would give me a list of names to call, maybe 100. And without having any connection with these people, any relationship, I would call them up and just start talking to them about refinancing. Does that sound crazy or what? Like those are some of the things that I used to do. And I can't tell you how many deals and how many relationships I made from doing that. But I wasn't afraid of picking up the phone because I embraced the no.
I love that, man. That's really cool.
All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap things up here. So there you have it, the 5 high leverage negotiation tactics straight from one of the best in the game. These aren't gimmicks, they're tools. And the more you use them, the more naturally they'll show up at every conversation you have. You don't need to be a hostage negotiator to use these. You just need to care about communicating clearly and getting better results in business, relationships, and everyday life. If you got value from this bonus episode, hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to sharpen their negotiation game. Until next time, keep progressing, keep communicating, and go into your next negotiation, not like a Joe, but like a pro.
Absolutely. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Can't wait to share a brand new episode with you next time on the Pursuit of Progress podcast.
We'll see you guys next week.